Welcome um, to this meeting on what is a absolutely beautiful afternoon when I thought it was going to be raining, and here we are inside. So there we go. I've received 3 apologies. There's Councillor James McGettrick, Councillor Mike Day, and Councillor Bev Hopkins. Are there any others? No. Are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interests? The only thing I would say is in the school development, it does mention Bishopston Comprehensive School, where I am a governor. So I will fill a form in for that section. And obviously you get the prohibition of whip votes. Could we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting? And could I have a proposer that they be taken as a true record? Francesca, thank you. And all agree? Those that were there, thank you very much. Right, public question time. There are no public questions, so we move on at some speed to the next item on the agenda, and that is harassment in schools update from Councillor Robert Smith, Helen Morgan, Rees, Director, Rodri Jones, the Head of Achievement and Partnership, and Lisa Collins, Child Protection and Safeguarding. So I don't know, Robert, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I can start off, and then I think Rodri is going to take us through the report. As you're aware, Chair, this came, as it says in the report, this came to committee in June 2021, where we provided a verbal report on issues that had been raised at the time. But what was clear then, and I think it's always been clear, is that this is not a task and finish one-off issue. This is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed all the time by all our schools and needs to be taken seriously all the time by all our schools, and not just our schools, everyone working with children and young people. So I think although it came to the attention of the committee then, the report, I think, reflects work that is ongoing, work that will continue to move forward. And I think it details some of the actions that have been taken, not in response necessarily to issues that were raised then, but because we as a council believe it's the right thing to do and the right way to move forward. So I'll hand over to Rodri, and then I think he'll be able to take us through the report, and perhaps we can have a discussion at the end. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Sorry, Helen wanted to come in. Shall I just get Helen to come in quickly before you, Rodri? Helen.
Thank you, Chair. That's really helpful in terms of Lisa Collins, our safeguarding officer, being present today. She's been called away on a safeguarding issue, so apologies from her. So Rodri will be taking us through the highlights of the report. But I am aware that the current panellists in this panel, really, scrutiny panel, may not have been aware of the background, really, but there were some key points in time that we've been responding to. Obviously, the Everyone's Invited platform, which is a website that Rodri can tell you more about, happened before there was scrutiny, really, from Swansea's perspective in June 2021. And then following that, there was an Estin report in December of the same year, and there were 9, I think, recommendations for local authorities, for secondary schools and for Welsh Government. So our part as a local authority in responding to those recommendations, because it was a ministerially commissioned review of what had happened as a result of Everyone's Invited. So more will be revealed. But the key message I want to get across is that proportionately as a local authority, we've responded well to those recommendations. There's more work to be done. But the key things that need attention really are 2 matters. One, whether children are now being invited by schools to actually report incidents of peer sexual harassment. and whether schools and the local authority can effectively monitor that is happening. So those are the key points that you should consider as a panel, and I'll hand over now to Rodri. Diolch yn fawr.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. As Helen and the Cabinet Member have touched upon, the focus became stronger in this area in June 2020, when the existence of the Everyone's Invited website was across the media and brought a lot of attention across the UK. What this website did was provided a space for victims of sexual abuse and harassment to share their stories. And off the back of that, what we had then was a number of testimonies across the UK, where, as part of those testimonies, different organisations, different schools, etc., were mentioned. Off the back of this, then, the Minister wrote to the schools, all the schools that have been mentioned in this report, highlighting, of course, the importance of keeping all our learners safe, but also the importance of fostering a culture where incidents of sexual harassment and abuse are not normalised, and learners are encouraged to and feel confident in reporting the incidents. The letter then went on to highlight all the good work that's happening, the support that's available both nationally and locally, via colleagues both in education and in social services as well, in the support that they're providing to our schools. So further to this, as the Director of Education has just mentioned, Estyn were commissioned to consider the incidence of peer-on-peer sexual harassment in the lives of our secondary age learners, and review the culture and process that helps to protect our young people in our secondary schools. So they then reported back in December 2021. In addition, then, the Senate's Children and Young People and Education Committee carried out a policy inquiry termed Everybody's Affected, Peer-on-Peer Sexual Harassment Among Learners, that reported back in July 2022. Our specific piece of work in education focused off the Estyn report. As the Director made clear, there was recommendations for both the Welsh Government, ourselves, the local authority, and our schools. The focus here today is on the work that we've done as a local authority, but that often branches over into the work that our schools do, and they each support each other in ensuring that the right processes are in place, and we're creating the right environment for our learners to be able to speak freely at any point in time. We pulled together a working group which include representatives from our schools and officers of the local authority, on the Director's request, to pull together the position statements of where we are in Swansea, and to highlight the work that we would be doing to take this matter forward and to improve practices in Swansea. So as I touched upon, we worked mainly on the three recommendations for local authorities. So working with our schools to collect and categorise and analyse data linked to bullying and harassment, plan suitable intervention and support on gender issues, and then provide school staff with the necessary professional learning to adopt proactive approaches to peer-on-peer sexual harassment, including homophobic, biphobic and transphobic bullying and harassment. So in May 2022, following meetings of the working group, a position statement had been pulled together, and we focused really on each of the recommendations. So if we take the first recommendation, that work with our schools to collect and categorise and analyse the bullying and harassment data correctly, and off the back of that then ensuring that the right support is in place at the right time. Here in Swansea, most of our schools are now using a piece of software called My Concern. My Concern allows any member of staff within that school to record any instance of concern to them. This can be at all levels. This can be child A turned up to school today and didn't present as that child usually does. Say for a child that's been there for a number of years, the teachers and teaching assistants know our children. So, for example, in that kind of case, what assistant tends to do then, it flags it up. What you might then find out is that child might have been to a concert in Cardiff the night before, when the teachers had that conversation with the child, and as necessary, then on My Concern, that issue gets closed very quickly. But then the other side of that is the more serious incidents that we're discussing today. So what you'd have there is a recording of that disclosure from the child, and that could be to any member of staff that child or young person feels comfortable with, that they can open up to. That then allows the school to have a working group really around that child. It'll be highlighted to the lead safeguarding person within the school. But what you can do with each individual incident, then you can call in different professionals and officers on an individual case. So ensuring data protection. But if you're involving, for example, safeguarding officer from education, maybe the lead safeguarding officer from social services, for example, a member of the police, etc., you can create that safe space then to ensure that you're providing that right support around that child, and things can branch out from there. So that gives you a quick example of what My Concern does for you. What we didn't have at that time is that overview as a local authority. My Concern is very much a focus for that individual school, how they manage the processes, which is right, of course. They're the main carers for our children and young people. So what we wanted to do here in the local authority is get an opportunity where we can have an oversight of the types of incidents that are happening. Not down to the nitty-gritty, because it's important that that data is kept there, but a picture of what it looks like across Swansea. So to take an example, and touching upon a report that you'll be having later in the meeting, if, for example, we wanted a picture any time of the number of racist incidents in our schools, this piece of software will then allow us as a school, as a local authority, to have a picture at any point in time to make sure that we're putting the right kind of support in place to support our schools, support our learners, and support our staff. As you can imagine, schools working to work with us to develop a more consistent approach. We're learning from other local authorities that are slightly further ahead on their journey of using Clarity, which is the platform that sits above My Concern. And what we'll be doing is having particular flags that can be rolled out across our schools. So when they're recording incidents, be it peer-on-peer harassment, sexual harassment, racist incidents, there'll be a particular flag that they use for that incident, which then allows us to have that live picture of what's happening here in Swansea. On the second recommendation then, to plan suitable intervention and support on gender issues at both school and local authority level. We touched upon in the working group with our schools around the LGBTQ+ groups in our schools, but also discussing about the importance that these groups aren't always just specific. It can often be the case where, okay, we will set up an LGBTQ+ group for our learners. Firstly, you need to understand what your learners would like. So it's ensuring that you're having those conversations with your pupils so that you're planning around their needs, rather than as adults taking the decision, you need an LGBTQ+ group, the type of groups that they want to see. And what you now see is more diverse groups within schools that create more safe spaces for those learners. Also, as you'll see in the report, supporting our pupils on gender issues and accessing then resources that have been developed by the Western Bay Safeguarding Board, specifically a policy on transgender as well. But I'm also aware that Welsh Government themselves are doing a piece of work in this area as well. It's a really important area that it's important for our schools that they can be supported and that they have the right advice and guidance to support them in this area. On the final recommendation then, around providing school staff with the necessary professional learning, local authority safeguarding officer provides a termly newsletter and resources and signposting to policy, training and updates on various safeguarding guidance. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of information out there. So what we do as a local authority is for the benefit of our schools, we try and decipher what fits where. So rather than that they're getting 20, 30 emails offering different things from different organisations, what we try and do is through the working group and through our safeguarding leads that we are offering them the most up-to-date training that's going to support them in their schools. So upon review of the action plan, work is ongoing to analyse and benchmark the data. I'll put my hand up and say this has taken a bit longer than I'd hoped and expected in working with the company that provide the software. And again, the positive of this is the importance of data protection, is that we needed specific consent from each individual school to allow us to access that data. So that took a bit longer than we'd hoped. What that has now allowed us to do is have an overview of what the data currently looks like. And as you can imagine, because the schools have been setting their own flags, everyone's reporting it slightly differently at the moment. So what we're doing is we're learning from colleagues in other local authorities on the universal flags that they've recently rolled out for their schools. taking a look at these, see if they work for Swansea, then with the intention then in the autumn term that this will be rolled out to our schools, so that immediately then we'll start getting a picture in the 23-24 academic year of where we are in Swansea to make sure that we're putting the right support in the right places. Just to touch upon there, what my colleague, the safeguarding lead, has mentioned around the further work on harassment in schools. We're representing the Directorate and contributing to multi-agency response to the independent investigation into child sex abuse inquiry, which uncovered various child sex abuse issues, including exploitation and peer harassment. So since the publication of the report, there's been national training offers regarding harassment and a drive on harassment and bullying more generally. The local authorities therefore linked the work being undertaken for peer-on-peer sexual harassment to consider all forms of harassment and bullying. It's really important that we don't look at it in isolation, because a lot of the key pieces of work are linking in to the Welsh Government's rights, respect, equality framework, which pulls all this work together. So the intention is to develop consistency across our schools in how reports are encouraged, recorded and responded to. I'll pause there, Chair. I know I do tend to speak relatively quickly when I get into the flow of things, and pause to allow for questions and comments.
Great, thanks very much, Rodri. When you say it's taking longer, I'd rather, and I think everybody would rather it be right. And if it does take a bit longer, well, so be it, but we then get the right solutions. And I think that is a real positive, really. I think it's something that concerns everyone. And before I open it up to questions, can I just ask one question? Those points were great, but they are what happens with around the staff in schools and so on. In the pupil manifesto, people were asking in one of the lines, people need to be aware of what to do in the situation and where to get help and how they tell people. And I think that is the one thing that we really do need to flag up in every classroom, so that everybody knows where to go, really, because the work around, the flags and everything else is absolutely vital. So you know exactly where, what's happening, where we're going with it. But I think it came up, as I say, in the pupil manifesto that we all heard in 22, how do they report it? But shall I go out to a few questions and perhaps unless you want to come back on that one first?
Yeah, happy to come back on that one, Chair. And I think what I noted, I didn't go to my very last paragraph, which probably touches upon it, and sort of what you see now with the curriculum for Wales, and is the focus in the RSE curriculum, the relationship and sexuality education. So that is a main focus now for our secondary schools as they're rolling out this curriculum, is that real focus on that area to make sure that our learners are confident, but also that they know how to report these things, they know who they can talk to, they know who they can contact. And that's both within the school and outside the school, pointing to these organisations that are there to support our youngsters as well. And also within the PSE lessons, across our secondary schools for all age groups pick up on these topics, and making sure that we're creating those safe spaces. One thing that came out in the working group was that we need to have so many different ways of our children and people being able to report any concerns and issues that they have. A lot won't feel confident going up to a person one-to-one, and that may be a teacher, TA, etc. If they haven't got that specific relationship that they've built, especially if you're going new into a secondary school. So it's creating that safe space, be that what we discussed with a number of schools, was that a virtual Dropbox where you can put something in just to share it and ask them to contact you back, and creating those safe spaces really for our learners. So that's where we're currently at. But yeah, the real focus is on the RSE curriculum to support our youngsters going forward.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes, we've got Councillor Von Jardine.
Thanks, Chair. Rodri, thanks for the report. I've got a couple of questions. Okay, so some of them I'm sure you probably answered. So one of my first questions is, when schools come back with they don't report, because at the moment, very few schools, or there's some schools that never report an issue. They don't, that's my understanding. So are we going to be a bit more there's got to be. And I know that sounds strange, but it stands to reason there's bullying, there's harassment, there's complaints. So are we going to chase that up? Are we encouraging school, how small it might seem to the teacher or the adult, to register it? That's one of my questions. Chair, can I do all of them?
No, sure, yeah, do that, and
Okay.
then
So, well, you have sort of explained some of this about having a safe space in a virtual, because sometimes, and I recently had an experience of this, a young lady disclosed her sexuality, and now, as she explained to me, very much regrets it, because people she thought were her friends, and you know, we like to say young people, but as people, we can be quite cruel and insensitive, whether or not we mean to be. So, I know you said about the virtual and the Dropbox, but will those things be kept as confidential as possible, so that there is no comeback on a young person who has decided to disclose whatever it is they decide to disclose? And you said about staff professional learning. Learning, having the training is fine, but not all staff, not all adults are sensitive or understanding of the other person's issues. Or so that one is probably a bit trickier, because you can't account for people's emotions and feelings. But I'm just a bit concerned that how are we going to ensure that the young person remains safe and their information is confidential? And yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you very much. Who's going to respond? Rodri?
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Jardine. Yeah, really pertinent points that you're making. As far as any schools that aren't reporting issues, it's really important to make clear here that when issues are reported by any child, young person, that it's that school's responsibility then to make sure that the appropriate action is taken at that time. What this piece of software will allow us to do as a local authority is, yes, you are right, it would raise concerns if we've got a school not reporting instance and keeping a log of them. What we need to be make sure, if we have schools that aren't, for example, using that platform at this current point in time, we're making sure that they've got the right processes in place within their schools, be that a paper version or a different piece of software. But we are hopeful that we'll get to a point where all our schools are using that software. What we will be doing, links to the work that the Welsh Government is doing, is continually making sure that our staff and our schools are aware of what's out there and what the requirements are, be that reissuing the guidance, the training, the professional learning offer, working with Partneriaeth, who are our professional learning partner, in making sure that this gets the attention that it does require. That also links to the confidentiality issue. It is absolutely vital that all our staff at all levels are aware of the confidentiality of any disclosure that is made to them by a child or young person. And we'd be extremely concerned if that wasn't the case. But again, what we will continue to do in our work on data protection with our schools, but also in our work on harassment in schools, is making sure that is a key priority for our schools. And I'm sure it will be for our school leaders, it will be for our governing bodies. And it's important to note the role of the governing body in this, that we as a local authority will make sure that our governors have that right information, which allows our governors then to provide that challenge to make sure that the right processes are in place as well. And then on your final point, yes, it is probably the most difficult one, but it is then about leadership from us, the local authority, leadership from the senior leadership team within the school and the governing body, to make sure that all staff are aware of the sensitivities of these issues, and that all staff are in a position to support every single child and young person that makes a disclosure. So probably not as much of an answer to the third one, but more of a statement to assure you that the work that we'll be doing will be supporting that area for sure.
Great.
Thanks,
Yvonne.
Rodri. Chair, can I have a quick comeback, please?
I was about to say, would you like to come back? Yeah.
Yes, on the very first one, I wasn't saying that schools won't report. My concern, what I have found in the past, is some schools are inclined to say we don't have those issues, and that's why I'm saying that that's just not possible. I know that I've had a bit of a conversation of that with Rodri last year. It's just not possible that you don't have any of those issues. And so some schools don't report because they say they don't have any. So my question really is, are we going to be challenging that? But you
Yeah,
don't have to answer now, Rodri, because that's a bit of a question. So
no,
thanks,
happy
Chair.
to, no,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, happy to. Yeah, I think it's always for myself really, as in a school that doesn't report or is saying that we haven't got any of these issues in our schools. I'm a firm believer that schools are a representation of the committees of the communities that they're in. So of course you'd expect to see the issues that we're seeing in communities being reflected across our schools. I think the work that Eston have done and the minister's focus on this work is really focusing on to make sure that all schools have systems in place to report these. And I think it goes back to the definitions of incidents. I think there's probably a number of years now where we've actually focused on the definition of incidents, etc., and getting back to that definition of that an incident is an incident if either the young person involved or somebody who witnesses something believes it is so. So I'd expect then to see an improvement and more consistency across the board then, because I think the attention this is now bringing to the recording of the incidents, I think creates a safer space for our schools as well. I think in the past, our schools might have been afraid that by having such data, that they would be tarred with that you are a school that's got an issue here, rather than that you are a school that's good at reporting it and that you're taking it seriously. So it's as much for me in creating that safe space for our schools to be able to report as it is creating that safe space for our learners.
Okay, great. Fine,
Thanks,
thank
Rodri.
you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Chair.
I think
We've got Councillor Robert Smith, then Councillor Sue Jones.
what Rodri's described there, the confidence within schools, yes, that's a practical step we've got to develop. But I think what you're describing, Yvonne, is in a way part of the problem we've got here. And it's one of the things we've got to address by creating a different culture in terms of how we respond and how society responds to issues around harassment. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. This is about changing people's mindset and changing the way we approach things. And I think, that's what underlines and underpins all of this work around.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. This is not really a question, but it's a question for us all. How do we embed this into the community? Because antisocial behaviour, bullying of young children, it's been reported to me within the last fortnight outside school, but how do we embed it with the children for future involvement in the community? I don't know.
Great.
You can answer it.
The $1 million question. No, you're absolutely right, and I think it does come from the very start of our children and people's journeys through education, and I'm hopeful. I'm always the optimist that the work that we're doing now with our new curriculum embeds this in the learning of our pupils, and is that focus on creating our citizens of the future, and citizens of the future who are tolerant and do accept everyone that they come across from day to day, both out in schools and our communities. But you're absolutely right, as in by just doing this in our schools, is it enough? No, it's not enough. But what we want to create is strong enough citizens from our schools who then have that impact in our communities, who give them that confidence to stand up in their communities to show what's right and what isn't right. But yeah, it's probably not a question we'll answer quickly or easily this evening, I'm afraid.
No, it's not. And schools have got a big part to play in this, but they can't do it on their own. And I think we've got to be this. That goes back at least 20 years. Or you said this is everybody's business, and it is the whole community's business.
Great, thank you. Helen.
Yeah, I haven't got a magic wand to answer the question either. It's very much a strong rhetorical question, really, for us all. And for me, it's about that prevention in terms of the learning. Respect and tolerance is one thing, but pride in the place that you live is another thing as well. And that continuity of whatever you've been taught at a young age, whether that is translated into good citizenship and what that looks like as a child, as a young person, and then further on into adulthood. But by listening to young people's voices, some of those vulnerable children who become, what's described as the one who are antisocial potentially in a community, there's very often a deep-rooted reason why that happens, and they are very much vulnerable in themselves, and they're probably vulnerable learners in our schools, and then they enter into their adulthood and into adolescence in a very vulnerable position, and that makes them vulnerable to all kinds of exploitation. So I think it's a very good question, and it's a very difficult one to answer this evening. But I firmly believe that whatever we can do at the earliest opportunity to prevent matters getting worse and providing that good quality education to give them pride in the place they live, and also choice and in how they participate within their community and the places they've got really in terms of recreation, play and enjoyment within their community.
Right, I don't know what that was, but any other questions? No. Could I thank Rodri and Robert and Helen and for the questions as well. I part of it is stuff we all have a duty to me as councillors to make sure that our schools get involved with the community. I certainly do, and I know you do as well. And I think that is so important. I met some pupils this morning from Greece and Romania, and they did not get involved with their communities and were shocked in a good way that we were doing it. And they said that they could learn from that, because in that way we are teaching them citizenship. We are saying that the community belongs to them, and we all have a duty to make sure that that actually happens as well. Actually, it's not just down to the school, because it's what happens when they feel a part of that community. But listen, thanks, Rodri. Thank you very much indeed, and everybody who put the report together. That's been a lot of work, and I just throw in one thing. Is there an opportunity? Joy mentioned something. I would say Joy. Sandra mentioned something earlier, and that that a notice couldn't go up in the classrooms. This is who you contact, so that it's in their face really, so they do know. But thank you very much for that.
Yeah, that's in place in most of our schools, and when I go on my visits, I'm happy to say that I'm seeing that loud and clear. And what's really positive to see is spaces that has been created in our schools, and safe spaces sometimes just for children and people to have that quiet space they can go to where no questions are asked. There's a space where they can go to when they need to. So yeah, it's definitely firmly at the thoughts of our teachers in our schools, and but we'll continue to support them to make sure that it remains the case then.
Jennifer and Pam, and again,
sorry, I didn't have that on, so they wouldn't have heard a thing online. Sorry. Tackling racism in schools, really important. And welcome Councillor Robert Smith, who's going to kick this off, and then Jennifer Harding-Rees, Richard, sorry, and Pam Cole, who are going to come in then to highlight some of the points. Robert.
Yes, and again, I'd like to thank Jennifer and Pam for the work in preparing this report. It's, as in the previous item, it's an example where there are specific actions being taken. There is a specific agenda and a report that we're responding to. But again, this is about changing culture, it's about influencing behaviours on an ongoing basis. and the type of thing that we do want to see in Swansea, and the type of thing that we certainly don't want to see in Swansea. And it's moving forward. There's no place for racist behaviour in any environment, or any place in Swansea. And I think schools have got a key part to play in it. But as I said earlier about harassment, we can't expect schools to achieve miracles on their own. And it needs to be part of a much broader approach across the whole of society. But over to Pam and Jennifer to take us through the report, Chair.
Pam first, is it?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chair. So Jennifer and I have prepared this report together because elements of this work strand in both of our roles. So I'm going to start off and then hand over to Jennifer. So you'll see through the report lots of examples around the work we're doing on anti-racism. So some of those work streams are led by the LA. Some of them are via Partneriaeth, the professional learning partnership, and other examples are more school-based. So we're going to pick out the points that are pertinent to our individual remit. And I think, as has already been alluded to, there has been a shift from tackling racism per se to one of anti-racism in Wales as a whole, and that really is systemic change, shifting mindsets. So it's going beyond that equality and diversity remit. In part, this is being driven by the national Welsh Government's anti-racist plan, the ARWAP, as it's called, Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, where there's a commitment for an anti-racist Wales by 2030. So that's sort of very much overarching. Education and us as a local authority then have a play a key role, particularly around broadening learners' understanding and knowledge of their diverse cultures, past and present in Wales. So there are actions linked to education within that plan. In addition to that, we've also got quite a number of elements within Curriculum for Wales that link to that wider anti-racist agenda. So they're listed in section 1.2. So there's a number of areas there that link to this area and help in creating that anti-racist ethos in schools. So currently the Welsh Government are supporting the Diversity and Anti-Racist Professional Learning Partnership called DARPL to deliver and drive that professional learning for all areas of education within Wales. Their professional learning is very, very powerful. It's really excellent. They've recently published a guide for school leaders on supporting the development of anti-racist cultures within schools. And that's set out into 5 key areas, which is in 1.1.3. So they're looking at governance and leadership, school environment and the hidden curriculum, parents, carers and community partnerships, professional learning and development, and pedagogy and curriculum. So you can see from that that anti-racism is very, very wide in scope. As such, we've set out the examples in the report and some of the work that we're doing under those areas, because actually it is a useful framework, and I think it's useful for us to use that framework moving forwards to look at our forward actions and maybe where we've got gaps. So in terms, just going back to our local context, which is outlined in 1.2.1, we can see that diversity in the city is increasing year on year. And in fact, in the last 10 years, the number of minority ethnic learners in our schools has more than doubled, actually, looking back at figures. It's important as well to consider that when we use the term minority ethnic, that does include learners who are from white but non-British backgrounds. So a really good example in our local communities are Polish learners, which is one of our biggest groups actually. But learners are from many, many different backgrounds. So this is not a homogenous group, although we're using that term, and the amount of diversity varies considerably across all schools. But as far as I know, I think every school in Swansea has got at least one minority ethnic learner, or those schools nearer the city centre are, higher. But it's really, really important that we acknowledge and we focus on the fact that developing anti-racist practices is applicable to all schools and all settings, and obviously wider society. So it's really important that we do consider that. Moving on in 1.2.1, as per really the national picture, we can see that the data that we currently hold for our workforce and our governors does demonstrate a mismatch between representation there and the numbers of our minority ethnic learners. So if we look at teachers from the most recent survey, 1.1% of our teachers in Swansea schools identifying from minority ethnic backgrounds, whereas that's compared to 18.9% of our school population. But there are quite a number of work streams going on at national levels, looking at trying to redress that balance that's interlinked to the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan. So I'm just going to pick up on a few areas through the report now that are linked to my area of work. So very much, it's really important that this is a whole school approach, and governance and school leadership are involved. It's really, really fundamental to schools developing that anti-racist stance. It's not about one person trying to sort of change things within the schools. One of the core activities of my team is an annual evaluation that we carry out with schools. It's based on English as an additional language learners and good practice for those learners and inclusivity for them. Previously, or at the moment, we're working with schools with higher diversity, but I'm looking to expand that out in the future. It was never intended to focus on anti-racism per se, because it's come about prior to that, but there are sort of quite a lot of elements and questions that align with this agenda, and you'll see questions that we ask as part of that evaluation stranded throughout the report and what the responses are, and it will give me an opportunity this year when the process is undertaken, which is currently happening, to actually relook at those questions and see if we've moved on. But overall, through this process that's been in place for the last 2-3 years, we have seen improvement in practice in terms of English as an additional language and that inclusivity, and making English as an additional language and language teaching a responsibility of all in the school. Again, not reliant on the EAL coordinator or the person that supports the learner. So it's about the whole ethos of the school as well as the learners. In terms of governors, so through the evaluation, we've previously and already been asking questions about looking at the representation on governing bodies. But over the last year or so, I've been leading a working group that's looking at actions at local authority level to support the diversifying of governing bodies. So we're developing resources, we've had an event, and there are a number of plans going ahead. So the head of Harvard is part of that group, and he's been very successful in his own school, and that's given in an example in the report of going from no representation to I think it's having 3 governors. And notably, we've recently run in March an event in conjunction with DARPL for governors, looking at developing anti-racist stances and how they can support their schools. This was pioneering, so it's the first event of its kind in Wales, and DARPL are looking to roll this event out to other areas of Wales. Is very well attended. I think we had 57 schools and the feedback's been excellent. So a task now for our working group is to look at how we build on that. So it's not just a standalone. How do we reach more governors? How do we keep that continuing? In terms of monitoring racist incidents at local authority level, Rodri's already outlined my concern and the clarity, so it's really part of that system. As he's explained, there's going to be a flagging system that should enable us to pull up the information and monitor what's happening across the authority, and then putting in relevant support where needed. So we're looking forward to that coming to fruition. But there's a question within our evaluation about processes for dealing with racist incidents, and all of the schools we work with have confirmed that they've got robust places at school level for that. So when we move on to section 2.2, that's around ensuring a welcoming environment and ethos. It's about not having almost subliminal messages that make children or learners or parents not feel welcome. So it's about representation, maybe in your displays. It's about having different languages around the school. But one really good example that getting schools to focus on that is the Schools of Sanctuary Award scheme. So that's a national scheme that particularly focuses on fostering a culture of welcome and inclusion, mainly around asylum seekers and refugees, but it broadens out really about inclusivity for all ethnic backgrounds. So we've got 6 schools that are recognised to date. So we had the first school in Wales, Pentre Hafod, 10 years ago, was the first school in Wales to get the Schools of Sanctuary Award, and they've been reaccredited. We've got schools going through the assessment process at the moment. We've got a number of schools then that are interested in working towards this award, and that sends out a real message about welcome and inclusion. And also there are aspects of the accreditation process that require or ask the schools to work with their parents and community and include those. So you've got an example in the report in 2.3.2 from St Joseph's Cathedral Primary. I'm also involved in another really interesting project that is in conjunction with a colleague in Partneriaeth. It's linked to the curriculum, so it's linked to the language literacy and communication area of the curriculum, and it started off about recognition of the multilingualism that we have in our communities. It's sort of branching into other areas at the moment. So it's mentioned on page 7. It's the main, within Curriculum for Wales, there is mention of building on learners' home languages and bringing those into the classroom and ensuring learners can use their whole linguistic repertoire. So that's the basis of it. So we've been working with a number of project schools on that, in terms of building up those multilingual environments and using the skills in the classroom. I think one of the key impacts for me so far has been the impact on the learners, where they've got have a real sense of belonging and absolute pride in their languages that's come through this work. And it also, we're having discussions around almost labelling. We're using the term EAL learners, which almost implies deficit, whereas actually if you say they're multilingual learners, it gives a completely different picture to the learners. So they come in with something different and something that other children don't have in the school, and it's actually changed children's attitudes to other learners. So we've been running for a couple of years. There's still quite a lot of work to do, but some really, really interesting, encouraging work happening within that project. Also, it's really imperative with curriculum that the work to do with diversity and anti-racism is embedded across the whole school, in practices, in processes, and throughout the curriculum. It's not about doing a diversity day or celebrating a few festivals. It's much more intrinsic than that. So you've got a number of examples in 2.5.1 that show how a range of schools are taking that forward. And I think encouragingly, from what I've been seeing through the work, is that schools with low diversity are as engaged in this agenda as the schools with higher diversity. And I'm now going to pass over to Jennifer.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So to move on to the professional learning and development aspect of the report, so if I can draw your attention to item 5. Obviously, this is a key aspect of supporting teachers, practitioners and schools with regard to embedding diversity and inclusivity and an anti-racist approach in curriculum design, and also pedagogy and resources that will be used. So if I can just highlight some of the key aspects of the professional learning offer that's happened over the last year or so. We've really wanted to ensure that the professional learning offer supports that anti-racist education and ensures that it's there at the planning stage. Obviously, all schools and teachers have responsibility for designing their own curriculum, which is learner-centred and places their learner at the centre of the curriculum design. We're very mindful that diversity and human rights are cross-cutting themes and cross-cutting elements, and we want them to be there right at the beginning of the curriculum design process. So going back to spring of 2022, we were able to commission a national RE advisor, Blakelock, to work with over 100 teachers via online webinars, virtual professional learning, with 6 3-hour sessions being commissioned to support teachers with having an understanding of what anti-racism is, particularly with regard to RVE. It fits very comfortably in the religion, values and ethics framework. So we wanted to ensure that teachers were there and had a real understanding of how anti-racist RVE can be approached and developed. And we managed to provide professional learning for over 100 teachers from across Swansea. That's cross phase, so both primary and secondary phases. We have begun to consider the impact of that professional learning, and that's something that moving forward is going to be something that we need to look at in more detail with regard to how it's rolling out with regard to curriculum design. But we had some really, really positive feedback, and that's highlighted there in 5.2. Moving on to 5.3, Partneriaeth, our professional learning partners, have commissioned DARPL, that Pam mentioned earlier, to work with schools across the region. The focus of their professional learning offer has been, again, on developing an anti-racist curriculum and developing a decolonised curriculum. We are very much aware that this is an area of development, and we'll mention that towards the end of the report. But what you can see in 5.3 is the Partneriaeth Anti-Racism Professional Learning overview, so that you can see how Partneriaeth are developing that from October through to the end of this academic year. We are aware that very small numbers of Swansea schools have been involved in that partnership and working with that particular stream of professional learning, and that's something, again, that we'll come back to towards the end of the report. Moving on to 5.4, in autumn of 2022, the Swansea Education Department was invited to present at the East Conference entitled Becoming an Anti-Racist Wales, How Can You Play Your Part? It was a very open forum. I was invited to speak along with the lead for the Welsh Government on the anti-racist agenda. So it was very, very well attended and allowed a large number of partners to ask and to raise a number of questions. During that forum, there was quite a lot of questions around the agenda of hate crimes and the reporting. So it's good that we've already mentioned that across the board. And again, that's something that that Pam and I have talked about at length. Working in conjunction with the DARPL director, Chantel, who we have identified in the report, I've been asked to develop and deliver a webinar to support schools with a wider understanding of racism and therefore anti-racism, to really ensure an inclusive approach to anti-racist professional learning offer. And so in June of this year, I'll be delivering a session with Norma Glass, MBE, from Swansea. You might have come across the wonderful Norma, looking at anti-Semitism within education and supporting schools to develop an anti-Semitic approach. And that's really, really interesting kind of part of the work stream in moving forward to widen our understanding and our schools' understanding of what anti-racism is. Moving on to item 6, where we've got pedagogy and curriculum. We are working quite closely with the commissioned publishers with regard to the BAME timeline, which has been part of the Welsh Government offer, the Welsh Government support of ensuring that BAME education is there within the humanities AOLE, and again ensuring that we've got representation there. And so I'm working with them on authoring several key figures, outlining the stories, the impact on Welsh history, culture, and then offering some suggestions with regard to big questions and streams of learning to support teachers at a classroom level with their curriculum design and pedagogy. So again, that's an important piece of work, and I believe it will be published as these things are. We're saying end of the summer term, I'm guessing sometime next year. But that's a really important and exciting piece of work as well. And I think that's it with regard to professional learning and where we are. Do you want to pick up on the rest, or have we covered? Yeah. Actually, I'll draw you back, if that's okay, to just one more stream of work that we had in 6.4, which is the World Reimagined project, which ran throughout 2022. Swansea was one of 7 cities and 10 London boroughs that participated in the project, and that really provided a great springboard for schools to develop a very creative approach to anti-racism. We had a number of pupils involved, a number of schools involved, some of which received funding to work with poets and artists to develop a very much a learner-centred approach towards anti-racism. And you might have seen the globes that were placed across Swansea from August to October last year. There was quite a lot of work and quite a lot of social media interest in that as well. So we had the schools that were part of that project identified in 6.4, a number of primary schools, and again, Pentre Harvard School as our secondary school, kind of leading the way there with regard to that project. We've also got the Peace Mala project, which I'm sure a lot of members have got knowledge of, and that continues to be a driving force with regard to interfaith and anti-racist work. A number of schools continue to be involved with that. It was wonderful to be part of Harvard Primary receiving its platinum accreditation last year, and again we had the Education Minister in attendance for that, so that was a lovely event. The project has an exhibition in Swansea Museum in June, and that will be open for all schools to visit, and we're encouraging schools to take pupils to that, to see the wonderful interfaith work that's happening there. And then I just think, lastly, if I just draw your attention to 6.6, we had, again, kind of some sector leading work really with our first anti-racist pupil conference in Wales in September of last year. Again, we were supported by Welsh Government with our Education Minister, Jeremy Miles, who opened that event in Swansea.com Stadium. It was a full to capacity event. We had 140 pupils and their teachers involved in a really, really high energy, high impact day, exploring themes of respect for all. We had 17 primary and 9 secondary schools engaged in that day with some wonderful practical activities and really kind of encouraging our pupils to become ambassadors as they go back to the schools, ambassadors for anti-racism and an anti-racist approach. We've had some lovely feedback on that, and that's something that we'll be monitoring the impact on over the next year or so. And then to finish the report, regarding RVE and RSE, my advisory roles, we have ensured that the documents that we have to accompany RVE, i.e. the agreed syllabus, and for RSE, the template policy, have really got inclusivity, diversity at the heart, and are really kind of highlighting the anti-racist approach that we are adopting within the local authority, and supporting schools there to ensure that their curriculum design for both of those very, very important and now mandatory elements of the curriculum place the learners at the centre of their learning. And yeah, I think that's it for the professional learning. We're very much aware, conversations that Pam and I have very regularly, that this is very much a work in progress, and we're very much at the beginning of our journey, and there's still lots and lots of work to be done, and we've highlighted towards the end of the report some action plans that we really want to move forward to ensure that this agenda is firmly and successfully embedded across our schools.
Great. Jennifer, Pam, thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions? No, I think you're being let off the hook there, but can I say thank you very much indeed. That was obviously a lot of work went into preparing that report, and not just the report in the sense of a report, but the action plans and the ongoing work that it involves. And I know Robert now wants to come in, but thank you very much indeed.
Yes, just to mention, I mean, the report, I think both Pam and Jennifer gone through the report, and I think that's highlighted the immense amount of work that's been going on and will continue to go on. So I think, you know, and it's just a snapshot of where we are. So thank you both for that.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks very much indeed. The next item on the agenda, and if you want to leave now, you're very welcome to, because I appreciate all the things you got on. You don't need to stay, but you're very welcome. But you can escape if you want to. And the next item on the agenda is quality and dedication, and that's being led by Councillor Robert Smith, and then I believe Helen Morgan Rees and Louise Herbert Evans, as well as, I'm told, Kelly Small. So great, Robert.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, I'll introduce the item and then ask, ask Helen, Louise and Kelly to come in. I think the report is a very good summary of the work that's been going on in Swansea. It showcases some of the fine examples of investment in new school facilities. And of course, that's only part of the story. It's not just about the new buildings. It's about how we are upgrading and improving and modernizing other buildings as well. So I think it's over to Helen. We're not short of ambition here in Swansea. We've achieved a lot. And again, as I've said, I think it's about the third time I've said it this afternoon. A lot's been achieved, and we've got a lot more we want to achieve moving forward.
Thank you, Robert. Helen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously very proud of the capital team's work in delivering against a strategic outline programme of projects. I think there were 15 originally projects when we set out our Band B programme back in 2017, I believe. Colleagues closer to the detail will correct me. But very proud of the traction really during the course of the last few years. Obviously there are constraints that I'm sure Louise will touch upon in her presentation, but this really is a celebration really of the traction in delivering against those projects within the whole scheme of the programme. So unless Kelly wants to come in on a particular point, I'm happy for Louise to start the presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Can you all see the presentation on the screen? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
So yeah. I'll just start by contextualizing where we are. So this is part of a long-term programme with Band A that was completed in 2019. We invested in 9 schools, 51.2 million. Band B, which started in 2019, and the official date for completion of Band B is the 31st of March 24, an investment of 149.497 million, which really was a seamless transition. Our objectives and what we're intending to do, it really is part of a long-term strategy. The capital intervention rates, some of you may recall that the Welsh Government improved those intervention rates shortly following the strategic outline programme approval for Band B. So we're currently have a 65% contribution for Welsh Government for the majority of our school projects, with 75% ALN, such as special schools, pupil referral units, 81% for projects built using the mutual investment model, which is a revenue funded, and that 81% is intended to really put projects on an even keel because of the potentially higher costs relative to that, and 85% for the voluntary aided sector. So obviously Band B, roughly 3 times the size of Band A, and we're continuing to deliver it with constrained capacity, not only internally within our education team, but also within building services. There have been resourcing issues, and also externally. in the consultant and contractor market. So our total spend delivered to date is just over 50 million as part of Band B. And that really is a good achievement. We're doing very well compared to some other authorities. And we're in the process of developing business cases for a further 43.4 million. And that represents about 68% of the total Band B programme, excluding what's included in it for the aided sector. So in addition to the Band B Sustainable Communities for Learning programme, there's also been significant capital maintenance investment. Our own internal investment has been complemented by additional Welsh Government grant funding that we've benefited from over recent years. So for the Band A period 2012 to 2019, we impacted on at least 89 schools with a total spend of 22.7 million. And in the Band B period, since 2019, I think by the end of this financial year, we'll have invested in capital maintenance investment in more than 76 schools with a total spend of 25.8 million. So moving on to our projects that we have delivered as part of the Band B programme. This you can see is an image of Maesteru, our new pupil referral unit in Cocket. That had an approved FPR7 value of 9.6 million, which was delivered within the approved budget. We did have a delay, specifically linked to the pandemic at the time. Some of the contracting team, in fact, were diverted onto the Bay Hospital project, but it was successfully completed and the pupil transition was completed in July 2021. And this is one of two new Welsh medium primary school builds that we've completed as part of Band B, YGG Talalan. You can see the image there on the right of it is in the construction phase. That had an approved FPR7 of 9.8 million, but that also included 100% funding of just over 1 million as part of the Welsh Medium grant that we managed to secure. And that project also, started on site in July 2020 and completed in December 21 with pupils and staff occupying the new build in January 2022. And then our second Welsh Medium primary school build, YGG Tidai now, and you can see some nice images of that new build. That also started in the summer of 2020 and also had Welsh Medium grant funding of 1.2 million with a total value of 11.55 million. And that completed in October of 21 and was open to pupils in November 21. And then Ysgol Gyfan Goer also benefited from investment as part of our Band A programme. This was to a new extension, which you could see in that earlier slide, with the intention of increasing capacity and some remodelling internally to improve suitability and maximise the efficiency aligned with the Building Bulletin spatial guidance. That had an approved FPR7 value of 6.7 million, and it started on site again summer of 2020. Phase 1 was completed in the 1st of November. Completed the 1st of November 21. That included the new extension and the outdoor facilities, and then phase 2 was completed in June 22 for school occupation, and that was more of the remodelling and internal works. Bishopston Comprehensive School. This was a major refurbishment, remodelling and extension project, and I think actually on that earlier image, no, you haven't got the extension there. We had we built a new block as part of that, the first phase of that project, which then enabled us to move pupils out of the main build into the new block. So we were then able to progress through the building. I think officially we had about 7 phases, but in practice There were about 10 different phases to move through that school building. It had an approved FPR7 value of just over 15 million. Again, that started on site in June 2020. The final internal phase works were completed in March of this year. And an update since the papers were issued. The final sort of demolition, reinstatement and external works have now been completed. Before we actually issue the formal completion certificate to the contractor, there are some more minor outstanding works to be completed that can't be undertaken, most likely, I think, in the May half-term holiday. And we've also got a date now for the official opening ceremony for that of the 7th of July 2023. So in terms of the remaining Band B, we're currently working on the business case development for Bryntawy, the special schools and Gowerton School. Bryntawy is a project looking at addressing sufficiency to add additional Welsh medium places to meet demand in secondary, as obviously to complement the strategy for the primary sector. The special schools to provide new and enhanced accommodation for the special schools with increased planned places. And Gowerton School, which is specifically around condition and suitability. And then moving forward, obviously, we'll then be looking at options for the remainder of the programme. So the Welsh Government have announced that they will be moving away from the banding that we've had. We were expecting that there would be an announcement that we would have a Band C, but instead what they're now planning is a rolling programme, which I think better suits their funding, but also better reflects what's actually happening, because quite clearly authorities aren't delivering everything exactly within those 5-year bands. They have confirmed that the intervention rates will remain the same for the rolling programme, and we'll be expected to submit a new strategic outline programme by March 2024 that is split into, and it's our term in the absence of any other terminology, sort of 3-year waves, which the programme itself, when we submitted our Band B strategic outline programme, what we get back is an approval in principle in effect for that programme. It's not at that point in time making a financial commitment on the part of the council or the Welsh Government, and there is an expectation that that programme then will be reviewed every 3 years. It is important, though, that we include our aspirations, if you like, in that programme, because as we move forward, if they're not included in it, then the Welsh Government won't be considering business cases unless we then submit a revised strategic outline programme. And just to explain that a little bit more then, we set out here sort of the 3 waves. So wave 1, which will be years 1 to 3 of the programme, is in effect, we would expect that to be the projects that have not yet been completed as Band B, where we're expecting to make that financial commitment and progress with those projects on site in that period. And then wave 2 is where we're looking for firmer in principle support, where I think we'd be more likely to be to have identified capital funding from the authorities' point of view. And it could be, for example, projects that we've got to first of all embark upon a statutory proposal before we can take them further forward. And then wave 3 is longer term pipeline projects that is reflecting our longer term strategy. Just a little bit on the mutual investment model. So Swansea Council signed up to the strategic partner agreement with WEPCO and Welsh Government. We have a number of projects within our programme, including a voluntary aided sector project that have been identified to be delivered through MIM. At the start of Band B, Welsh Government identified a capital sum for the delivery of the Band B programme, but also 500 million of revenue funding. So like other authorities, we included an element of MIM projects in order to get our share of the pie, as it were, because that was some of the available funding. So within our programme, we've got a roughly 124 million showing as traditional capital funding, with 25 million as MIM revenue funded projects. That's 16.9 million if the voluntary aided sector scheme is excluded from that. So MIM doesn't require a local capital funding contribution, but instead it incurs an annual revenue charge. However, the Welsh Government has recently undertaken a review of its MIM programme, as it has now reached financial close, and two schemes are in progress now, have started on site with Flintshire, as it happens, and Rhondda and Taff. And there have been sort of some fairly significant challenges and lessons learned through that process. So the outputs of that review are that it's likely that smaller scale projects are less attractive for MIM projects, and MIM is most likely to be suitable to the larger projects, but also potentially colleges as well, who don't have the access to the same sort of borrowing as local authorities. So that's something that we'll be looking at over the course of the next few months. And then LDP strategic sites, we've got strands of the programme that we have elements of it that aren't entirely in our control. We respond to planning consultations for any new developments in accordance with the supplementary planning guidance. And for the LDP strategic sites where obviously there are potentially some significant there is some significant development. You can see here, Garden Village, 750 units, Penllygare, 850, and Kevin Gavelak, 1,950. The potential impact in terms of additional pupils in a locality is quite significant. For all these three sites, sites B, C, and D, we have signed Section 106 agreements now, and the strategic master plans for those sites show a new school build in those sites. And the Section 106 in most cases gives the option to the developer as to whether or not it is going to build the new school build, or whether or not it is going to release contributions at the relevant triggers within that Section 106 agreement. So that is something we are monitoring. We work closely with planning on to monitor the progression of the development of those sites, but clearly the progression that could lead to a potential new school build on any of them could take some years, because to reach the triggers that will involve a significant number of houses in the first instance to be occupied. And then programme risks and issues touched on earlier. Capacity and resilience both within the council but also externally, contractor and consultant capacity. A very significant one now that we're facing, and no surprise at all. Obviously our programme, our Band B programme, was developed in 2017, so that was 6 years ago. And we would expect over the course of that time, obviously it would be impacted by inflation. And obviously at the time that the programme is put together, it's based on very high level information. And as we move forward with the programme, we develop the detail and refine the scope. But of course, over the course of the last 12-18 months, we've been impacted by some significant inflation. So that is certainly going to impact on what we can deliver within the current funding envelope. And then the final risk that we've noted there is around developer contributions and timing uncertainty. So obviously with regard to those strategic sites that I talked about on the previous slide, it is very much a case of us monitoring the progression of those sites to trying to manage that, be able to resource whatever we need to do to be able to respond to that, and obviously ensure that we're managing any additional pupils appropriately. So some other funding streams that we have as well. There've been two areas that Welsh Government have been focusing on in the last year or so. One is community focused schools. And in the last financial year, we received a grant award of just over 1.4 million, which it was quite challenging really to try and manage how we were best going to utilise that funding. And we did open it up to all schools to submit expressions of interest. And we've now got 8 projects completed of just over £800,000 and 7 projects yet due to be completed with a total spend of just over £600,000. We were fortunate in that Welsh Government did agree that they would roll forward, or we would be able to roll forward that funding to this financial year, because it was going to be a challenge to get that all over the line in the last financial year. And then we also submitted an expression of interest for some further community focused schools funding. This was done a little bit more strategically than the previous grant award. Of that expression of interest, not that long ago, we had £910,000 worth of projects across 3 schools approved, pending submission of an information proforma, and then a further £500,000. We haven't had a formal approval for it, but it looks promising insofar as we've been asked to submit further information. So we have to do some further scoping for that £500,000 for a mix of smaller projects. And then for YGG Bryn Tawy, there is a proposed project to provide an all-weather pitch and do some further improvements there, linked also with the leisure activities on the site. That's a £1.1 million project, and we've now been asked to submit a more detailed business case for that. And then the other area of focus is the additional learning needs capital grant, which again was a 1.444 million award last year, and of that we've got £120,000 spent on ALN equipment. We've distributed just over 1 million to all of our schools to support improvements and resources to address or support social communication needs. We've also got work going on and planned for 2 primary schools to provide SEBD provision. And we've also got in development projects across 4 primary schools to support the STF pilot of 200,000. And then finally, universal free school meals. We have a total funding envelope of 433 million. At the time that we did this, we made this presentation, there's probably a slight improvement on this now. We have 62 schools where we've completed works, installed equipment, or didn't require any work in the first place, but that's been a huge undertaking really to provide additional equipment and associated works across all of those schools. At that time we had 13 further schools projected to complete by September of this year. Some of those schools are where we've had more complicated works that we've had to undertake, for example, the installation of canopies. And then we've got what we called 5 major projects. That's across 5 primary schools, where in order to provide the appropriate space and equipment needed to deliver universal free school meals to all pupils, it does require more investment in the infrastructure. We have gone back to Welsh Government to seek some additional funding for one of those schools, and we know we've got risks around the remaining, so obviously work is ongoing there, and we will go back as necessary to Welsh Government to seek further support. And of course the year 1 rollout of universal free school meals is complete in February of this year, with the year 2 rollout due after May half term. Any questions?
Great. So thanks very much, Louise, for the really detailed report. And I can see that Robert wants to come in.
You've said exactly what I was going to say, Chair. Louise has taken us through a very detailed report there, and I think it's a tribute to her and a tribute to the team, the level of detail that they're able to demonstrate, not just in this presentation, but ongoing throughout the management of this program. It's a small team responsible for the delivery of some very big projects and some very important projects here in Swansea. And I just want to pay tribute to Louise and pay tribute to her colleagues for the work they're putting in. And as I said, the professionalism in the way they're taking this forward.
Great. Thank you very much. No, agree. Absolutely. Angela, got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It's really interesting, and it's great to see all the money being spent on the schools. I'm just wondering, just because I don't know, is there sort of criteria that schools have to match in order to get funding? I can think of 1 or 2 schools that desperately do need money, but maybe they're not high on the list, or there's others that are deemed worse than that. How often are you sort of going out to these schools and checking maybe how vulnerable they are in terms of walls, fencing, whatever else that they may need? Some schools I can think of do need a lot of money spent on them. I guess it's obviously the budgets are really, really tight. I'm just curious as to how often you check this, or what criteria they have to meet. Thank you.
So I think the criteria depends on what it is that is required to be done. So if we're talking about the well, I'll start at the beginning. So first of all, we have quite a lot of information that we hold, that we and we update. So there are 2 key in terms of the building fabric. There are conditions survey reports, excuse me, and condition surveys. There has been I think the surveys, there's been a bit of a year missed, I think, because for various reasons. Probably the pandemic hasn't helped it. Don't want to keep using that excuse, but the condition surveys are due to be undertaken every year, and the strategy for that is not all schools every year, because that would be quite a significant undertaking, but a percentage of schools undertaken every year, with the remainder having a desktop survey, because obviously the school surveyors have quite a good knowledge of the schools, and also of investment that may have been undertaken by the authority in those schools. So those condition survey reports should be published annually. The next round is due to be published fairly imminently now, and we also have suitability assessments of our schools. So we undertake what we call a building bulletin analysis, which looks at our schools in terms of the space that they've got relative to the number of pupils that they have. And it's not just looking at capacity, it's looking at other spaces like halls and outdoor areas, if they're across several sites or different buildings, and if that impacts on the curriculum delivery or school organisation, for example. So that sort of data would help to support and inform and start that sifting process for potentially more strategic investment, but it would also support the prioritisation for example, capital maintenance investment. Sometimes, I mean, with schools, in terms of what are we going out and checking, so whilst we want to hold this data so it helps us to prioritise and helps to understand the extent of need, the responsibility to maintain those school buildings and to manage them, and that premises management sits with schools. So there is a division of responsibility that all schools should be aware of, that sets out what is the responsibility of the school and what is the responsibility of the authority. So my advice to a school is always get in touch with your surveyor. If you've got any issues, get their advice. And quite often, sometimes what we find is that issues can become a bigger problem because they're not dealt with in a timely fashion. So quite often as well, that some of the issues will be for the school to deal with rather than a capital maintenance issue, or if we've got a lot of issues that are coming up, those capital maintenance issues have to be dealt with on the basis of priority, that where the most urgent need is. And then in terms of the various other sort of ad hoc grants that we get, for example, talked about the community focused schools and ALN, they usually come with quite specific criteria in terms of the benefits and outcomes that the Welsh Government are looking for through those grants. So with the first community focused schools grant, we did open it up to all schools to effectively bid for some of that, and I think we met with the majority of them to talk about their bids, because some of them, whilst it would have been great to say yes, you can have some of that funding, it wasn't actually meeting the criteria. It was something that school wanted to do but didn't hit those criteria.
So, you know, just a couple of slides before the very end, you said there was, I think, 500 million for was it expressions of interest or something? Is that available now for schools to come forward, or is that something that's already sort of been allocated?
The expression of interest that I talked about was the last expression of interest for community focused schools. So we have got 500,000 of that is not yet allocated. We bid for that and it's not yet been approved, but on the basis of specific criteria and objectives and outcomes aligned with the criteria that we would need to hit for that grant. So we've got a piece of work to do around that, and then we will start talking to those schools that would link to that. I think one of the particular areas that we were looking at there was in terms of attendance and improvements to attendance and engaging with families.
Ah, okay.
So they're quite specific.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Right. Are there any other questions? I can't see any hands up. So can I thank Louise, once again for a really detailed report, and thanks for answering the questions as well in the way that you did. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, and the next item on the agenda is just the end of year review, really, and what we've been doing. I think I've always felt that Scrutiny is a critical friend, and I mean friend, because I think it really is important, because we all want the very best for Swansea and children in Swansea. And I was very pleased that when Eston came to look at education in Swansea, we as a county had a very good report, but Scrutiny were also congratulated in that report for the work that was done over that year. So thanks to everybody involved with that. Has anybody got any comments about the programme from last year?
I was just going to ask if people had any thoughts about what went well and what's not gone so well.
Yeah, no, sure. And if any thoughts people have about that or any of the items, any comments? I think the school visits that we did were absolutely excellent, because it puts a spotlight under that school. They are really proud to take us around. I'm using Maestero as an example. We all learned an awful lot. And going back when we did the Dylan Thomas school and people raised issues about Dylan Thomas, I knew that they weren't right because I'd seen what was happening on the ground. So sometimes those visits really are really good and put a real focus. But we've covered a lot of areas really during the course of the year. So I don't know if anybody's got any comments, and if not a problem. Yeah, sorry, Michelle.
Just there's a few questions in 1.3. We just wanted to just for you to have to think about, and if you've got anything to say, especially, I mean, it's something for new members as well as coming in fresh, is what you think went well, what didn't go quite so well. Were we focusing on the right things? Have we learned anything that will help us in the future? So it's just a few things to have a think about, and whether you wanted to mention any of those today, or you can also email me after if there's anything.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but as I said, we covered a lot of ground, and I would like to thank all the staff in the education department, because, and also the cabinet member, because both he and Helen have taken a real interest in Scrutiny, have come along because they are keen that we properly scrutinise. And I have to say, any issues that we have found, you've been straight out there to try and solve them. Any issues that we've raised, and all the staff have come along and given really full reports, as we've seen today, and that has been the case throughout. So big thanks to everybody there. But I think we clearly had a job to do. It's an important job, because education is about the future of children in Swansea, and I hope that we've made a contribution. So if there aren't any questions, please feel free to drop Michelle an email. That would be great. And the final item really is just for information, is the individual school ESTIN reports. So if you'd like to have a look at that and have a look through, and there's some recommendations that have been made as well. So thanks for that. And following that, really, to say thank you very much for coming along today. And for some of you, I was about to say, have a safe journey home. You haven't got far to go, but everybody else, have a good weekend coming up when it eventually arrives. Thank you all very much.
Bye. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Bye.